Hello guys. Welcome to part 2 of She Had Days to Live. But her jealous sister had other plans until the forest demanded a choice. This is Tales by Zikura. Before we dive into today's story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment below. Your support means the world to us. Now let's begin. The procession departed through the eastern gate, a river of determined women flowing toward the dark line of forest visible on the horizon. The forbidden forest earned its name. Even from a distance, it seemed to crouch malevolently, its canopy so thick that no sky showed through, its boundaries marked by dead trees that stood like warning posts. As they drew closer, the other pairs began dropping away, their courage failing when confronted with the reality of those shadows. Some turned back at the tree line. Others ventured a few steps in before retreating, pale and shaking. By the time they reached the forest's true entrance, only 12 pairs remained, and even those looked uncertain. The path ahead was barely visible, a suggestion more than a road, winding between trees that seemed to lean inward conspiratorially. Strange sounds echoed from within. Not animal exactly, but not quite anything else either. The air itself felt different here, heavier, charged with something that made skin prickle and hearts race. Zaram stepped forward first, her chin raised defiantly, determined to show no fear even as her stomach churned. Adago followed more slowly, conserving energy, her satchel heavy against her hip. She'd had an episode that morning, brief but violent, and the weakness still lingered in her limbs. As they crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the sounds of the outside world, birdsong, wind, distant voices, cut off as if severed by a blade. "Stay close," Zaram said loudly, for the benefit of the other pairs nearby. "I'll protect you, sister." The words dripped with false concern, and Adago had to suppress a bitter laugh. Protection was the last thing Zaram intended to offer. The first hour of walking was almost disappointingly normal. The path remained visible, the trees merely trees, the dangers apparently exaggerated by superstition. Several pairs grew confident, joking nervously as they navigated roots and ducked low branches. Then the path forked without warning, splitting into 3 directions that all looked equally valid and equally treacherous. The elderly priest's instructions had been vague. Follow your heart, trust your instincts, stay true to your purpose. Adago closed her eyes, reaching for the knowledge Mama Neka had taught her about reading the land. The leftmost path smelled of decay, sweet and cloying in a way that suggested rot disguised as attraction. The right path seemed easier, but its ease felt like a trap, too convenient for a forest designed to test travelers. The center path looked darkest, most difficult, but the air there moved differently, carrying scents of living water and growing things. "Center," Adago said quietly, and started walking before Zaram could argue. Her sister followed, resentment building with each step. Already Adago was taking charge, making decisions, demonstrating the knowledge that made people value her. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. Zaram's hand drifted to her pocket where the vial waited, a small glass promise of resolution. Soon, she thought, when they camped for the night, when Adago was distracted, 3 drops in her water skin would begin the process. By the time they reached the honey tree, if they reached it, Adago would be too weak to continue. And if she happened to fall or fail or simply disappear into the forest's darkness, well, these things happened in dangerous quests. Everyone knew the risks. The forest consumed them completely by the second hour, its canopy weaving so thickly overhead that time became meaningless in the perpetual twilight. Other pairs had chosen different paths at the fork, their voices fading until Zaram and Adago walked in profound isolation, accompanied only by sounds that defied natural explanation. Whispers that might have been whined through leaves or might have been something else entirely, footsteps that matched their rhythm then diverged, laughter that seemed to come from beneath the earth rather than above it. Adago's breathing had taken on a labored quality, each inhalation requiring conscious effort, but she pushed forward with the grim determination of someone who knew their reserves were finite and refused to waste them on complaint. They made camp as the already dim light began failing further, finding a small clearing beside a stream that ran surprisingly clear. Zaram gathered wood with aggressive efficiency, building a fire larger than necessary, needing the activity to silence the thoughts circling her mind like carrion birds. The vial in her pocket seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, demanding attention, demanding action. Just 3 drops. So simple, so final. She watched Adago settle, heavily against a fallen log, her sister's exhaustion evident in every movement, and something almost like regret flickered through Zaram's chest before she crushed it ruthlessly. You've got this, she reminded herself. This is necessary. This is justice. Adago unpacked her meager supplies, laying out dried meat and hard bread, filling her water skin from the stream. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the episode she'd suffered while Zaram collected firewood. A bad one that had left her spitting blood into the undergrowth, her vision darkening at the edges, her heart hammering so irregularly she'd feared it might simply stop. But she'd recovered enough to function, and function was all she needed. Not comfort, not cure, just enough strength to reach the honey tree. After that, whatever happened didn't matter. Let me finish this, she prayed silently, watching flames catch and spread through Zaram's carefully constructed fire. Just let me finish this one thing. You should eat, Zaram said, her voice almost gentle, and Adago glanced up, surprised by the tone until she saw her sister's expression. A studied concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. Understanding dawned slowly, a cold certainty settling into Adago's bones. Tonight, whatever Zaram had planned, it would happen tonight. The knowledge should have terrified her, should have sent her scrambling for safety or confrontation, but instead, she felt an odd calm. Perhaps death by Zaram's hand would be faster than the slow deterioration her illness promised. Perhaps it would hurt less. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them like a third presence. Zaram kept glancing at Adago's water skin, her timing calculating, waiting for the right moment when her sister's attention wandered. But Adago seemed unusually alert, her dark eyes reflecting firelight, watching Zaram with an expression that might have been sadness or might have been knowing. The moment stretched, tension building like a storm that refused to break, until finally Adago spoke.
You hate me.
I know you hate me, she said quietly, and Zaram flinched as if struck. I've always known. I just never understood why. What did I do, Zaram? What did I do to make you despise me so completely? The question hung in the smoky air, and for a moment, Zaram considered lying, deflecting, maintaining the pretense they'd both upheld for 17 years. But here in the forest's darkness, far from witnesses and consequences, the truth clawed its way up her throat like something alive. You exist, she said finally, her voice raw with an honesty that surprised them both. That's what you did. You exist and people love you for it. Not for being beautiful or special or blessed, just for being you. Do you know what that's like? To be called a miracle from birth, to be praised and celebrated and held up as proof of divine favor, and still be second to someone who should have been nothing. Adago absorbed this, her expression unreadable. I never asked for their love, Zaram. I never competed with you. I just tried to help where I could, to be useful. That's exactly the problem. Zaram's voice rose, cracking with years of suppressed rage. You don't even try, and it just comes to you. Respect, admiration, love, especially love. Obinna looks at you like you hung the moon, and what am I? Just the pretty sister. Just the ornament. You're dying, Adago. Yes, I know, everyone knows even if they pretend otherwise, you're dying and he still chose you over me. How is that fair? How is any of this fair? The confession left Zaram trembling, exposed in a way she'd never allowed herself to be. Adago watched her sister cry with an expression of profound sorrow, not for herself but for Zaram, for the prison of beauty and bitterness that had trapped her. It's okay to feel angry, Adago thought. It's okay to feel cheated by circumstances beyond your control. But it's not okay to let that anger consume you until there's nothing else left. I'm sorry, Adago said softly, and meant it. I'm sorry that my existence hurt you. I'm sorry that the world valued you for the wrong things and me for reasons I never earned. But Zaram, poisoning me won't fix any of that. It won't make Obinna love you. It won't make you feel less empty inside. Zaram's hand flew to her pocket, instinctively protective of the vial whose existence she'd never mentioned. I don't know what you're... Please, Adago interrupted gently. Don't insult us both with denials. I saw you with the king's advisor. I know what you bought. I know what you're planning. She paused, her next words careful and deliberate. And I'm telling you that you don't have to. I'm already dying, Zaram. My heart is failing. Some mornings I wake up surprised I made it through the night. If you want me gone, just wait. Time will do your work for you. The bluntness of it shocked Zaram into silence. She'd known, abstractly, that Adago was ill, but hearing it stated so plainly, the casual acceptance of imminent death in her sister's voice, made it real in a way that observation never had. How long? She asked, and hated how her voice shook. Weeks, maybe. A month if I'm lucky and don't exert myself. Adago smiled, that heartbreaking gentle smile that made people want to protect her. This quest will probably kill me faster. The exertion, the stress, my body can't handle it. But I chose to come anyway because at least this way, my death might purchase something valuable. Reign for the kingdom. Hope for people who have none. That's worth more than dying quietly in my bed. Zaram felt something crack inside her chest, a fissure in the armor of jealousy and rage she'd constructed so carefully. You're really not afraid, she whispered, awed despite herself. Oh, I'm terrified, Adago admitted. Fear of death is natural, but I'm more afraid of dying. Without purpose, without meaning. I'm afraid of being forgotten the moment I'm gone, of my life amounting to nothing more than a footnote in someone else's story. She met Zaram's eyes directly, her gaze steady despite her trembling hands. You could be remembered too, you know, not as the beautiful princess or the miracle child, but as the woman who helped save her. Kingdom, we could do this together, Zaram. Actually together, not just walking the same path while planning each other's destruction. The offer hung between them like a lifeline thrown across an abyss, and Zaram stared at her sister as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Here was Adago dying and aware of it, still offering partnership, still extending grace to the sister who'd tormented her for years. The generosity of it was incomprehensible, and Zaram felt something inside her, the cold, hard thing she'd nurtured so carefully, begin to soften despite her desperate attempts to maintain it. No, she thought frantically. Don't let her manipulate you. This is another trick, another way she makes people love her. But even as she thought it, she knew it was a lie. Adago wasn't manipulating anyone. She was simply being herself, offering what she always offered. Compassion without condition, forgiveness without price. I can't, Zaram whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was refusing. The partnership, the forgiveness, or the fundamental shift in perspective Adago was offering. Her hand closed around the vial in her pocket, its glass surface smooth and cool against her palm. 3 drops. That's all it would take to ensure she returned alone, claimed the glory alone, had Obinna's attention by default when no alternative remained. The plan was sound. The reasoning was justified. So why did her hand refuse to move, frozen in her pocket like it had taken root? There? A doggo coughed suddenly, a wet, rattling sound that brought blood to her lips. She wiped it away absently, as if this were merely an inconvenience rather than a harbinger of organ failure. "You should sleep," she told Zaram, settling back against the log with obvious exhaustion. "I'll take my first watch. The forest feels restless tonight. Something's watching us." "You're in no condition to keep watch," Zaram protested automatically, surprised by her own concern. "I'll do it. You need to rest more than I do." But a doggo was already closing her eyes, her breathing evening into the shallow rhythm of someone conserving every ounce of energy. "Wake me in a few hours," she murmured, and was asleep before Zaram could argue further, her face peaceful in a way that made her look even younger than 17, vulnerable and fragile and utterly trusting despite everything she knew about her sister's intentions. Zaram sat by the fire, staring at a doggo's sleeping form, the vial still clutched in her sweating palm. She could do it now. Pour the poison into a doggo's water skin while she slept. Ensure that by tomorrow her sister would be too weak to continue. It would look natural, tragic but explainable. The sick princess who pushed herself too hard and paid the ultimate price. No one would suspect. No one would question. She uncorked the vial, the faint chemical smell making her nostrils flare, and reached for a doggo's water skin where it lay beside her pack. Then a doggo spoke, her eyes still closed, her voice drowsy but clear. "My notebook is in the outer pocket of my satchel. If I don't make it back, give it to Mama Neka. She'll know what to do with the information, which herbs work best, which combinations heal what ailments. Years of learning shouldn't die with me." She shifted slightly, sighing. "And tell Obinna, tell him I was grateful for seeing me, for wanting me despite everything. Tell him he made me happy, even if only briefly." The trust implicit in those instructions, the assumption that Zaram would honor a dead sister's wishes, would carry messages and deliver notebooks instead of simply leaving a doggo's body to rot in the forest, struck Zaram with the force of a physical blow. She stared at the vial in her hand, at the water skin she'd been reaching for, and suddenly saw herself clearly, a woman so consumed by jealousy that she was prepared to poison her dying sister to claim a prince who would never love her anyway. The image was grotesque, monstrous, and for the first time in years, Zaram felt genuine shame burn through her like fever. She corked the vial with trembling hands and threw it into the forest darkness, hearing it shatter against stone somewhere beyond the firelight. The sound seemed to echo forever, and when it finally faded, Zaram felt lighter somehow, as if she discarded more than just a bottle of poison. She wouldn't be that person. She couldn't be. Whatever happened on this quest, however it ended, she would not be her sister's murderer. The decision settled into her bones with quiet finality. The night passed in strange stillness. Zaram kept watch, feeding the fire and listening to the forest's inexplicable sounds, whispers in languages that predated human speech, movements that suggested creatures too large to exist, a pervasive sense of being observed by intelligences that had never been and would never be human. Once, she thought she saw eyes reflecting in the darkness beyond the firelight, too high off the ground to belong to any natural animal, but when she blinked, they were gone. The forest was testing them, she realized, measuring their worthiness through means she couldn't begin to understand. When dawn came, or what passed for dawn in the forest's perpetual gloom, a doggo woke. With a gasp, her hand flying to her chest. Another episode, Zaram recognized, watching her sister struggle for breath that wouldn't come easily, her face contorting with pain. She tried desperately to hide. Without thinking, Zaram moved to her side, supporting her weight, rubbing her back in awkward circles the way their mother had done when they were children with nightmares. "Breathe," Zaram murmured, surprising herself with the gentleness in her voice. "You've got this. Just breathe." Adago's eyes widened with shock, but she was too oxygen-starved to comment, focusing all her energy on pulling air into uncooperative lungs. The episode lasted 5 agonizing minutes before her breathing stabilized, leaving her shaking and pale, leaning heavily against Zaram's shoulder. They stayed that way for a long moment, neither speaking, both processing this unexpected tenderness between them. "Thank you," Adago finally whispered. Zaram nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude, unsure how to navigate this new dynamic between them. "We should keep moving," she said, helping Adago to her feet with surprising care. "How far to the honey tree?" Adago consulted the hand-drawn map the old priest had provided, though its usefulness was questionable. The forest seemed to rearrange itself at will, paths appearing and disappearing, without logic. If the legends are accurate, another day's walk. Maybe 2. Given. She gestured vaguely at herself, at the body that was betraying her more aggressively with each passing hour. "Given my pace." "Then we go at your pace," Zaram said firmly, and meant it. She gathered their supplies, distributed weight between both packs to lighten Adago's load, and set off at a measured walk that accommodated her sister's limitations. The change in her was remarkable, and Adago watched her with cautious hope, afraid to trust this transformation but desperate to believe it might be real. The second day of walking revealed the forest's true nature. The path twisted impossibly, sometimes looping back on itself, sometimes branching into configurations that defied geometry. They encountered obstacles clearly designed to test them. A chasm that could only be crossed by a fallen log so narrow that Adago's trembling legs nearly gave out halfway across Zaram, gripping her hand and pulling her forward with fierce determination. A section where thorns grew so thick they had to crawl through tunnels barely wide enough for their bodies. Zaram going first to clear the worst obstacles, turning back repeatedly to ensure Adago followed safely. A stream that ran uphill, defying every law of nature, its water tasting of minerals and magic when they drank from it out of desperate thirst. Through it all, Zaram found herself changing in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Each time, Adago stumbled and she caught her. Each time her sister's breathing grew labored and she adjusted their pace. Each time Adago smiled at her with gratitude despite everything. Something inside Zaram's chest loosened, some knot she'd carried for 17 years slowly unraveling. This was what it felt like to care for someone else, to put another's needs above her own vanity and ambition. This was what love looked like when stripped of selfishness and calculation. It was exhausting and terrifying and strangely, unexpectedly fulfilling in ways that all her years of being admired had never been. By the third day, Adago could barely walk. Her lips were blue, her skin clammy with fever sweat that had nothing to do with the forest's temperature. Each breath rattled in her chest like dice in a cup, and blood stained her teeth when she tried to smile. Zaram had taken to carrying most of their supplies, offering her arm constantly, sometimes simply carrying Adago when the path grew too difficult. They moved at a crawl now, covering distances that should have taken minutes and hours, but Zaram refused to leave her behind, refused to go ahead and return, refused every option that involved separation. "You could reach the tree faster without me?" Adago wheezed during one of their frequent rest stops, her back against a moss-covered stone, her face gray with exhaustion. "I don't want to reach it without you," Zaram replied simply, and meant it with her whole heart. "We started this together. We finished together." Adago's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for her sister's hand, squeezing it weakly. "When did you become the brave one?" she whispered. "I'm learning from the best," Zaram said, squeezing back. The honey tree revealed itself without warning on the third day, as if the forest had finally decided they'd proven themselves worthy of reaching it. One moment they were struggling through dense undergrowth, a doggo's breathing so labored that each step sounded like a prayer, and the next they stumbled into a clearing where the tree stood in impossible majesty. It was ancient beyond measure, its trunk wider than the palace throne room, its branches reaching toward a circle of open sky, the only break in the canopy they'd seen since entering the forest. Golden light poured through that opening like liquid blessing, illuminating the tree's bark, which seemed to pulse with internal luminescence. And there, hanging from the lowest branch within arm's reach, was a single clay pot sealed with beeswax, honey visible through cracks in the ancient clay, glowing faintly as if lit from within. A doggo stopped so abruptly that Zaram nearly collided with her, both sisters staring at the prize they'd sacrificed so much to find. It seemed too simple, too easy after everything they'd endured. The hostile forest, the psychological trials, the physical exhaustion that had reduced a doggo to a trembling shadow of herself. She'd had 4 episodes since dawn, each one worse than the last, and blood now stained her lips permanently. Her body too depleted to maintain even the pretense of health. She was dying actively now, measurably, and both sisters knew. She had hours rather than days remaining. "We did it," Zaram whispered, awe coloring her voice. "We actually found it." But a doggo's expression was troubled, her dark eyes scanning the clearing with the wariness of someone who'd studied enough legends to know they always contained catches. "It's too easy," she murmured. "The priest said the honey required sacrifice, that the tree demanded payment. This can't be as simple as just taking it." As if summoned by her words, the air in the clearing shifted. The golden light dimmed, and a presence materialized before the tree. Not quite solid, not quite spirit, something in between. That hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in their bones rather than their ears. "Two have come seeking the honey of life," the presence intoned. "But only one may claim it. The forest demands balance. A life for a life. The honey's power requires death to fuel renewal. Choose now. Which sister will take the honey home, and which will remain here forever, feeding the tree with her final breath." The words landed like physical blows, and Zaram felt her newly reformed resolve shatter. Of course there was a price. Legends always extracted their pound of flesh, and she'd been naive to hope otherwise. She looked at a doggo, saw her sister swaying on her feet, barely conscious, clearly minutes from collapse, and the old calculations began creeping back into her mind. A doggo was dying anyway. Wouldn't it be more merciful to let her sacrifice herself here, to give her death the meaning she'd been desperately seeking? Zaram could return with the honey, save the kingdom, marry Obina eventually when his grief faded. It all made such perfect, horrible sense. But then a doggo laughed, a sound so unexpected and genuine that it startled even the forest presence. "Well," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. "That's an easy choice, isn't it?" She turned to Zaram with a smile of heartbreaking serenity. "You take the honey back. You're strong, healthy. You'll make it through the forest without difficulty. I'll stay. I was dying anyway, and at least this way my death actually purchases something valuable." "No," Zaram said, and the word came out fierce, almost angry. "Absolutely not." A doggo blinked, clearly confused. "Zaram, be reasonable. I have days left at most. This is the logical." "I don't care about logic," Zaram interrupted, her voice cracking. "I spent 17 years being logical, calculating every advantage, justifying every cruelty with reason and rationalization. I'm done with logic. You're not staying here. You're going back." "I can barely walk." Adago protested gently. I won't survive the return journey. You know that. Then I'll carry you, Zaram said stubbornly, and meant it with a ferocity that surprised them both. Something fundamental had shifted in her during their days together. Watching Adago push forward despite agony, offering kindness even when surrounded by hostility, choosing purpose over self-preservation at every turn. Zaram had spent her life envying her sisters, goodness without understanding its cost, resenting Adago's courage without recognizing its source. But now, standing in this clearing with death hovering between them, Zaram finally understood. Adago wasn't beloved because she was perfect or special or blessed. She was beloved because she chose love even when hate would have been easier, chose compassion even when bitterness would have been justified, chose to give even when she had nothing left to give. And Zaram, beautiful and bitter and so desperately lonely, wanted to choose differently too. I wanted to be the kind of person who inspired genuine love rather than shallow admiration. I wanted to look in the mirror and recognize someone worth knowing. But that transformation required more than wanting. It required sacrifice, the kind of sacrifice Adago had been making her entire life without recognition or reward. The forest demands a choice, the presence repeated, its tone sharp with impatience. Delay serves nothing. One stays, one goes. Decide. Zaram turned to face the presence directly, her spine straightening with new resolve. Then I'm staying. Adago takes the honey back. Zaram, no? Adago tried to protest, but her sister cut her off with a raised hand. Listen to me, Zaram said urgently, gripping Adago's shoulders with desperate intensity. I've spent my entire life taking and demanding and believing I deserved everything just because I was born beautiful. I've hurt you in ways I can't begin to atone for. I bought poison to kill you, Adago. Poison. And you offered me a partnership anyway. You trusted me to deliver your notebook, to carry your messages, to honor your memory even though I'd given you every reason not to. Tears streamed down her face now, washing away years of carefully maintained composure. Let me do this one good thing. Let me give instead of take. Please. Adago was crying too, shaking her head weakly. You don't have to die to prove you've changed. Zaram, please. Yes, I do. Zaram interrupted softly. Not to prove anything to you or anyone else, but to prove it to myself. I need to know that I'm capable of loving someone more than I love my own comfort. That I can choose what's right instead of what's easy. That I'm more than just a pretty face with a rotten heart. She pulled Adago into a fierce embrace, feeling her sister's frail body trembling against her own. You've spent your whole life being brave. Let me be brave just this once. Let me matter. The clearing fell silent except for their mingled weeping, two sisters who'd spent 17 years as enemies finally understanding each other in the shadow of death. The presence watched impassively, neither encouraging nor discouraging, simply waiting for the inevitable conclusion. There's another way, Adago said suddenly, pulling back from the embrace, her eyes bright with desperate inspiration. The forest said one life for the honey, but it didn't specify which life, did it? What if we both stayed? What if we both gave our lives together and the honey was sent back with someone else? Another quester who's still trying to find their way here. The forest gets its sacrifice. The kingdom gets its reign. Neither of us has to choose between saving herself and saving her sister. The presence seemed to consider this, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. When it spoke again, its voice carried something that might have been respect. An interesting interpretation. The forest has no preference regarding whose life feeds the tree, only that the price be paid willingly. If both offer themselves freely, the honey will be delivered to the kingdom through means beyond your understanding. But understand this, There is no resurrection, no last-minute reprieve. Death here is absolute and eternal. Your bodies will feed the tree's roots. Your spirits will become part of the forest. You will never see your home again. Never feel sunlight outside this clearing. Never know whether your sacrifice achieved its purpose. Adago and Zaram looked at each other, a wordless conversation passing between them in glances and subtle expressions. In Adago's eyes, Zaram saw acceptance. Her sister had made peace with death long ago and faced it now without fear. In Zaram's eyes, Adago saw transformation. The bitter, jealous girl had cracked open to reveal someone capable of genuine love, and that person was choosing sacrifice over survival with clear-eyed determination. They'd spent 17 years as rivals, but in this moment, they were finally truly sisters. Together then, Adago said softly, extending her hand. Together, Zaram agreed, gripping her sister's palm with fierce tenderness. They approached the honey tree hand in hand, their steps synchronized, and as they did, the tree's bark began to glow more intensely, its roots rising from the earth like welcoming arms. The presence's voice filled the clearing one final time. The forest acknowledges your sacrifice. 2 lives freely given in love and unity. The debt is paid. The honey will reach your kingdom before sunset tomorrow. Your names will be remembered as long as stories are told. The roots wrapped around their ankles gently, almost tenderly, and both sisters gasped as they felt the tree's ancient consciousness touching theirs. Not hostile, but curious, welcoming them into something far older and stranger than human understanding. Adago's pain vanished. Suddenly, her struggling heart finally finding peace, and she smiled with pure relief. Zaram felt her lifetime of bitterness and jealousy dissolving like morning mist, replaced by a profound sense of rightness, of having finally chosen correctly after so many wrong choices. "I'm sorry," Zaram whispered as the roots climbed higher, as golden light began to fill their vision. "For everything I did to you, for every cruelty, every moment of hatred. I'm so sorry, Adago." "I forgive you," Adago replied, and meant it completely, without reservation or condition. "I always forgave you, Zaram. I just wanted you to forgive yourself." The last thing they saw was each other's faces, tears and smiles mingling, hands gripped tight. As the tree claimed them, as their bodies became bark and their blood became sap and their spirits merged with the ancient forest's timeless consciousness. The pain of transformation lasted only seconds, and then there was no more pain, no more fear, no more rivalry. Only peace and unity and the strange, vast awareness of being part of something eternal. The honey pot materialized in the palace throne room exactly as the presence had promised, appearing on the king's breakfast table, surrounded by impossible golden light. The clay pot bore inscriptions that hadn't been there before, words carved in ancient script that the old priest translated with trembling hands. 2 sisters, 1 heart, freely given. Let the rains remember their names. When the honey was poured into the sacred fountain according to ritual, the clouds that had been absent for months suddenly gathered like an army assembling, dark and heavy with promised water. The rain began gently at first, then strengthened into a deluge that lasted 3 days and 3 nights, filling rivers and wells and washing away the drought's despair. People danced in the streets, children played in puddles, farmers wept with relief as their cracked fields drank deeply. Prince Obina stood in the rain outside the palace, his face turned toward the forbidden forest, and wept for the woman he'd loved and lost. The king ordered a monument built, 2 statues of his daughters, standing hand in hand, eternally united in bronze and memory. Mama Neka received Adago's notebook, though no one could explain how it had arrived in her quarters, and spent her remaining years teaching the healing arts to anyone willing to learn, ensuring that Adago's knowledge lived on through generations. Search parties entered the forest seeking the princess's bodies, but found nothing except the clearing with the ancient honey tree, now even larger than before, its bark showing patterns that, from certain angles, almost looked like two young women embracing. The forest never surrendered its dead, but it never forgot them either. Travelers who passed through the forbidden forest in later years sometimes reported hearing two voices on the wind, one asking questions about plants and healing, the other laughing with genuine joy, both intertwined in conversation that suggested neither loneliness nor regret. The kingdom prospered in the years that followed, the rains returning with reliable regularity, as if the sisters' sacrifice had restored some broken covenant between land and sky. And whenever drought threatened again, whenever the wells ran low, people would gather at the monument and tell the story of Princess Adago and Princess Zeram, the dark-skinned princess who taught them about compassion, and the fair-skinned princess who learned about love. Not the story of rivals or enemies, but of sisters who found each other in the shadow of death and chose unity over survival, sacrifice over selfishness, love over fear. Dear viewers, Adago and Zeram's story teaches us that jealousy and comparison poison our hearts far more effectively than any toxin ever could. Beauty, status, and external validation are empty pursuits that leave us hollow, while genuine kindness and sacrifice create legacies that outlive our mortal bodies. It's never too late to choose differently, to transform bitterness into love, to become the person your best self knows you could be. Adago showed us that purpose matters more than longevity. A short life lived with meaning outweighs a long life lived in emptiness. Zeram proved that redemption is always possible, that one genuine act of selfless love can outweigh years of selfish cruelty. They remind us that our greatest power lies not in taking what we want, but in giving what others need, even when the cost is everything we have. You've got this, dear ones, the courage to choose love over hate, unity over division, sacrifice over selfishness. It's okay to feel jealous sometimes, to struggle with comparison, to wrestle with your darker impulses. What matters is what you choose to do with those feelings. Transform them, transcend them, let them teach you rather than control you. Thank you so much for watching Tales by Zikara. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below with your thoughts. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful stories to life. Until next time, choose love, choose courage, choose to be the hero of your own story.